We got freedom to gain, we feed them the game. Turn on the freedom exchange, we freeing your brain. They trying to shackle your mind, no half of us blind. Remember the past, but never go backwards in time. The ancestors lived through us, they help us build a model community. New Africa is soon to be. So tune in to Sister Marsha, Mujahideen, Imam Bilal, to get your cultural enlightenment now.
Welcome back to another edition of New Freedom Exchange, your cultural expression for social dignity and community empowerment. I'm your co-host, Mujahideen, here with...
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Marsha.
Wa alaikum assalam, everyone. Alhamdulillah, we're here. Imam Bilal is here. We're back. New Freedom Exchange, Saturday, last Saturday of New Freedom February, aka also known as Black History Month. And it's a pleasure and honor to be with you all this Saturday evening. Hope everyone is well. Please share. This live stream is a very, very special show, very special guest with us tonight. So if you're tuned in, please give salams. Let us know where you're coming in from, when you're tuning in from. But please share the live stream. And don't forget to like New Freedom Exchange with X on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, New Freedom Exchange with X. And also we're streaming from New Freedom Network and the Muslim Journal News. So don't forget to subscribe to the Muslim Journal News YouTube channel as well. How's everyone doing?
Doing pretty well. Today's actually my mother's birthday. So my mom, she passed. What's this year? She passed. This will be 10 years that she's gone in August. But it's her birthday, so this is for sure a special day in my memory. Both actually all three, me and my brother, as well as my mother, were all in February, as well as a bunch of my other family. But today, I'm remembering my mother. And also today, the Unified E-Committee had a Black History program at Masjid al-Haq. And so I spent most of my day there. That was a great program. We had adults and children presenting famous African Americans and just talking about the significance of remembering those stories and connecting who we are today to who they were then, and how that propels us forward. And specifically for the children, like making sure that they understand that they're the present day of those legacies, and that the essence of those people is what they're made of too. So their dreams, their visions, their goals, the things that they imagine that they could do, those people did it with much less. And so it was a really good day, and I'm glad that I had a chance to be a part of that program. How about for you all?
Today I was in motion, so in between a few events as well. But yeah, African American History Month, finishing out strong. Looking forward to tonight's program. How about you, Bilal?
Alhamdulillah, in motion as well, as usual, per usual. I was able to stop by the event at Masjid al-Haq for the young people and the adults. From what I saw, I was able to see, it was a beautiful program. It was just great to see the young people. It was very cute, very special and cute to see the children engaged about our history and actually doing presentations. I think that's very important. And also, a shout out to your mom, Sister Marsha. May Allah be pleased with her on her birthday today. And also, real quick plug, just came back from the movie screening of The Two Sons of Georgia. There's a documentary out on the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Dr. King, both coming from the state of Georgia, and their influence on us as a people. So shout out to Brother Hafiz, who is the film writer, director. Had a beautiful screening, had a Cityplex 12, aka the Shack Theater, which was free and open to the public. So inshallah, it will be coming to other campuses and other places very soon, and hosting more conversations around those two great men of our history. And with that being said, we have wanted to continue our program, our programming for New Freedom February with a very special guest, very special presenter this evening, coming to us about history, and particularly history of another movement. We know we talk a lot about the Nation of Islam and its evolution from the Nation of Islam to Imam Muhammad's community, but we do have to recognize, and we should recognize, that there were other movements around the same time or a little bit before that also existed or coexisted around the same time frame. And one of those movements is the Dar-Ul movement. And without no further ado, we have Dr. Kameelah Oseguera. Hopefully didn't butcher her last name wrong. So inshallah, let's bring on Dr. Kameelah, inshallah.
Welcome.
Wa alaikum salam. It is such a pleasure to be here with all three of you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, you're welcome. I'm excited to have this conversation because I know very little about the Dar, only to sort of just hear it in name. But as Imam Bilal said, there are other movements to be lifted up in the African American Muslim experience, and so I'm excited to learn some more today.
Absolutely. And shout out to February. It is just such an amazing month. My birthday was yesterday, actually. Yes. My daughter.
Last Friday.
Oh, okay. See, my daughter's birthday is also on the 15th. This is just, February 23rd is also the birthday of W.E.B. Du Bois, a lot of, historical figures. So I feel, this February, like Pisces season is just, some of the greats are born, including your mom, I'm sure. So
absolutely,
I'm pleased with her.
So tell us a little bit more about Dr. Kameelah.
Yes.
Tell us about your work, and then, of course, go into the history of the Dar.
Yes. So I have to start by saying that I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. So that says a lot about what shaped, what I study, who I am. Born and raised into a Muslim family. Master of Taqwa, Maumi, Amina Baya was and continues to be a member of that community. And so, growing up for me, this sort of question of who Muslims are, who Black people are, there was always an integration, right? My world was very Black and Muslim, and there was no contradiction. And only, honestly, when I went to college, did I encounter people for whom that seemed like at odds, right? So you're Black, but you're not Christian, and you're Muslim, and you're not Arab. And I was like, so what's the problem? Like, I'm standing right in front of you as a Black Muslim, born and raised. And so I was raised by a mother, I'm one of 7, who was very much a proponent and advocate for us to be educated about who we are. So as one of the few Black Muslim families in my elementary school, I was that kid who, when it came around to like Thanksgiving and other holidays, the kid who said, well, actually, Columbus was, a murderer, and he committed genocide, and he did not discover anything. So I was one of those children, because my mother wanted us to know an accurate history, including of who we are. So she was very well read. She, always maintained a library that included works of J. Rogers and of Garvey. She listened to tapes of Imam Siraj and of Louis Farrakhan. So my upbringing included so many important influences that for me, as I became an adult and met other Muslims, really being able to understand how much people wrestled with who they were actually fascinated me. I've always wanted to be a psychologist. So that's my training. I'm a clinical psychologist that specializes in family systems and restorative practices. I have expertise in trauma and healing. And that led to the founding of Muslim Wellness Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization really dedicated to exploring strategies and ways and strengths and challenges of what it means to be a Muslim in America. And so part of that work has been a real central focus on understanding Black Muslim well-being, not to the exclusion of other groups, but there's so much that I think everyone can learn about how how Black Muslims in particular have always strived to use Islam as a liberating force, as so much part of what it means to advocate for justice, and also for visions of possibilities of the future, right? So to be able to name ourselves, to be able to proclaim some kind of spiritual sovereignty, I think takes courage and bravery, and serves as a model that I think other American Muslim communities can actually learn from. And so part of all of that, right, my upbringing, my training as a psychologist, as a professor of psychology and Muslim studies at Chicago Theological Seminary, all of those influences led me to even think more deeply about my own personal narrative and how many of us share sort of that entry point into Islam that was through an Orthodox or Sunni Orthodox pathway. And so, what we encounter, and I think, in your introduction, you say that many people sort of understand the genealogy of the Nation of Islam, the transition to the W.D. Muhammad community, and still how it thrives today. But there was also parallel sort of movements that also spoke to, I think, this pursuit of spiritual liberation, of, just self-understanding, knowledge of self, and to connect with the Creator in a very authentic and organic way. So the Dar-Ul Islam movement is one of those movements that I think is sort of referenced, and it still has so much cultural significance, but the origin of that significance and of those cultural impacts have been lost. So my work, the People's Effort and Oral History Project, for me is an act of reclamation, of love, of correcting the narrative, right, of adding to such a rich history that I think certainly belongs to us, but it's a part of American history that I think more people should know about.
I think that's amazing. I just had to throw that in there, and I think that you delivered that so eloquently. When there were certain things that you said that sort of just jumped out at me.
Yeah.
The psychology piece. My daughter's studying psychology at Howard University, so I
Alhamdulillah.
make
Yes.
those connections. But
Yes.
I just want to know more. So I'm
Okay.
gonna let others jump in and ask the questions that they have.
Okay.
I'm so curious to know more.
So Dr. Kameelah, if you can
Yes.
talk a little bit to us about how the DAR started, like
Yes.
the who, like where did the movement start?
Mm-hmm. So if you could show that image, that, yes. So I think, and this is, of course, sort of stemming very much from my background as a family therapist, right? Is to always understand the genealogy, right, of the Dar as connected to other really important movements. I think what tends to happen is that these movements are isolated, right, as if these leaders did not talk to one another, right, or read about each other in the newspaper, or have their own sort of beefs, right? Like, well, I'm not on that, he's on that, right? Like, how do we, just the same way, right, in present day, there are folks who may take different positions, but we can have a lot of respect, right, for the platforms and the stances and the perspectives that other people take. So this, the reason that I created this this genealogy is for people to understand that nothing sort of emerges from isolation, right? That this was a standalone. And so the Dar officially is established in 1962. But prior to that, many know of the Islamic Mission of America, or the State Street Mosque, that was established by Sheikh Dawood Faisal and Mother Khadija. And so Rajab Mahmoud, Ishaq Abdul Shahid, and Imam Yahya Abdul Karim, prior to 1962, were studying at this Brooklyn, New York State Street Mosque, right? It was one of the few places that people could go for classes, for Jummah, to make, any other sort of congregational prayers. And so it became sort of a hub of learning and of discovery. And what might not be surprising, right? Although this institution was led by two to Black Muslims who are actually of Caribbean heritage, what these three men felt was that there wasn't sufficient attention being paid to the African American experience, right? Again, some of these sort of tensions, right, stem decades long. And so after a few conversations, what they decided was we need to establish our own, right? Something that speaks to what it means for us to be descendant of enslaved Africans, to really wrestle with what it means for us to be dealing with war, be dealing with poverty, crime, like all of these things that continue to plague the African American community. How does Islam provide an answer, right, or an antidote to those things? But it doesn't sort of erase the fact of culture, of history, of who we are. This is, also at a time in which we know that many folks are also descendant of those who were part of the Great Migration, right? And so part of what makes the Nation of Islam and Honorable Elijah Muhammad so influential is that as people are migrating from the American South to the North and Midwest and even the West Coast, they're looking for a spirituality, a ritual, a practice, which responds to their current circumstances, right? And so this is no different. And I think, what's so significant about the Dar at the time is that it is looking for, what they said, just an adherence to the Quran and the Sunnah as the foundation, right? And so what you didn't find was a rejection of Elijah Muhammad, any talk about Malcolm X. They actually really respected, right, this work as a movement, knowing how challenging it is to organize people, to provide them with a sense of belonging. And there's a quote from Robin D.G. Kelley, who's a current day sort of sociologist and scholar, African American scholar, and he says, "Too often, our standards for evaluating social movements pivot around whether or not they succeeded," he puts in quotes, "in realizing their visions, rather than on the merits or power of the visions themselves. By such a measure, virtually every radical movement failed because the basic power relations they sought to change remained pretty much intact. And yet it's precisely these alternative visions and dreams that inspire new generations to struggle for change." So for me, even in thinking about how do you share the history of the Dar, is not to say, oh, well, it ended in 1982 and then there was a splintering and what did they achieve? And at its height, it was, what did it catalyze? What did it actually make possible? And so at its height, right, 1962 to 1982, a 20-year time span, by some accounts, it included a network of 30 to 40 mosques across the country, right, internationally, as well as the Caribbean and Canada. This was the first time you see a founding of businesses. They had an incense factory, the first halal meat store, I believe, in the state. Very much involved in establishing what was then called sort of prison ministries or chaplaincies in New York State. And one of the most famous of those being the Green Haven Mosque, right? The Sankofa Masjid, which is still sort of populated today. There's schools, there's a printing press, there's a number of community programs. This is where you get the Jawala Scouts and the Alima Scouts. So I think, again, today people know those references, right? So when you see the brothers selling incense and oils, that started in Brooklyn with the Dar, right? And it was a way, again, to think about self-empowerment, sort of economic independence, right? And so you see this sort of theme running throughout Black Muslim movements in particular, that is about sovereignty, spiritually, economically, psychologically. What do we need to do to get back to ourselves so that nothing stands between us and our worship of the Creator as the Most High, right? If we worship white supremacy, if we don't understand the ways we've internalized that self-hatred, it acts actually as a barrier, right, to us being able to worship in the most effective and direct way possible. And so the Dar, in their efforts, the full sort of phrase was, it is the people's effort to return to Allah, right? And still to this day, that gives me chills, right? So you're talking, I don't know, somebody do the math, 1962 to 2024, that people, 62 years?
Mhm.
Okay, there you go. I mean, over 6 decades, right? There are African American Sunni Muslims who are saying this is about us being able to return to Allah, right? Being able to worship in the way that we believe, right, is the truth, being able to educate our children, right? So you hear some echoes of this, right, of the nation. But again, this is also part of like the cultural context of the time, right? So there is a rejection of what is sort of stemming from colonization, from enslavement. There in the picture of the genealogy, you can see the men are wearing turbans, they're wearing thobes. They in Brooklyn, people begin to reference them according to the fact that they did wear kufis, right? And so there's this very bold way, right, in which the women are dressed modestly. Some of them are even wearing the purdah or the niqab. This is in 1970s, right? We would say it's the kimar, right? So hijab didn't enter into my language until I went to college. Right? I was like, "What's that?" I've worn a kimar since I was 4 years old. I don't know what a hijab is, but one of the most sort of resonant aspects of this movement for me is the fact that this was a movement of young people, right? And I think we forget that it started in 1962, and the oldest member, like founding members of the community may have been between 25 and 30, right? So I think about what I was doing when I was 25. Right now, when I was 25, I opened a bakery, but I see that this was part of the spirit of independence, right? Of sort of self-reliance that I inherited from my mother, from my stepfather. My abu was the lieutenant in the Dar. And so the message that was impressed upon me was, right, Allah provides, right, and you must do everything, do your due diligence, and able to sort of see that potential and that provision realized. And so when I think about what was established, right, these 20, somewhere between 30 and 40 masajid or communities across the country internationally, most of the people were about, the eldest, maybe 35. This is extraordinary, right? And so it also reminds me that we have to, and I think I've shared this with you, Imam Bilal, that in all of our conversations, we have to include people who are between the ages of 18 and 29, right? We lift up the names of Fred Hampton, right? Who was, 22 when he was assassinated? We talk about the work of Martin Luther King, of Malcolm X. These were young men, right? These were young women who were founding movements that we reference and sort of idealize today. But how are we treating young people right now who are 25, 26, right? As if they have nothing to offer. But this history allows us to see that there is so much potential, right, and insight and wisdom in that inclusion. Unfortunately, I think one of the, well, when I talked to my abu, and he was part of the catalyst for me being able to gather some of this history, is, he, in his mind, and he's now, well, I hope he doesn't mind me saying, he's going to be 74 this year. And when he talks about Imam Yahya Abdul Karim, he still calls him my sheikh, right? Someone who, he joined the Dar when he was 22 years old. He was a Harlemite. He was like, yeah, I wasn't thinking about what was appealing to him sort of religiously. And when he encountered men from the Dar, it felt like a good fit for him. It resonated. He was like, I want to know what they're about, right? These brothers with the turban, and, you know, it's like they're giving each other the greeting, and like they're on something. But when he speaks about how formative, how pivotal, how meaningful that time was for him, it is almost as if he is still there, right? 1972 to 1982. And so when I hear the stories of the elders and how close, right, that history is for them, it feels for me like an obligation for us to record it and not to expect anybody else to do that work for us. So I'll stop there. I don't want to monologue the whole time.
This is a good
But
lesson.
there's just so much to share. But please let me know if you have any specific questions that I can answer.
What I would just say or inquire about, as you mentioned about them being young and
Yes.
obviously also being self-driven as well, and being an insider, what would you say are some of like the nuances? I know like in the Nation of Islam and Muhammad's community, like we have like, you know, they have things that they're represented, that they are known for. So of course, like you mentioned about the instance that you are known for, but like, what was like is there like quotes? Did you guys have like, you know, sayings or?
Well, you know, yeah. So those of us who grew up in the Dar, who were very much influenced by it, we'll call ourselves Dar babies, right? And this, I think what was impressed upon us is like Islam is serious business, right? So if and actually there is a picture of a brother named Bilal Abdul Rahman, who was second in command, may Allah be pleased with him, who was actually assassinated February 4th, 1974. And there's a picture of him, and I think on a chalkboard, and it says something like, Islam is not a joke. And they took that very seriously. And so you'll find that people who grew up in the Dar or were children of Dar members or even grandchildren, there is something very serious about the approach and practice of Islam. To some, that might feel like rigid, right? But when we remember that these were young people who were seeking, right? What is orthodoxy? What is a direct connection to the Quran and the Sunnah, right? It was what I recall is sort of the passing of like foundational texts, right, that were in English, often published in Pakistan. But it was, you know, how do we know what is true, authentic Islam, right? How are we learning? And so these were the parents were essentially, for better or for worse, everything is haram until we know otherwise, right? So you're going to stay on the Sunnah, right? You're not going, there's no mixing, there's no, there were no birthday parties, right? So all of this, like what we thought growing up was like, okay, the other Muslims have fun, right? We're a part of, I can joke about it now. As a teenager, it wasn't so much fun. But this is also, I don't know how many of you were familiar with Sensei Ali of Masjid al-Taqwa, who is a very close companion of Imam Siraj. He was this sensei of I don't know how many people, right? And so growing up, it was the girls and the boys learn martial arts, right? That we were very much sort of taught at a young age to dress as Muslims, right? To be proud of that. So the youngest picture I think I have of myself from 1982, I'm wearing a khimar, right? My mother is a seamstress, so I didn't buy clothes for myself until I was in college, right? And so it was this adherence to Islam, not just as what we believe, but what we should be practicing and representing as ourselves every single day, right? And you, based on who your family is, what community that you're a part of, you're representing all of that, right? So don't be out there in the streets up to no good, right? Because it was, you know, the idea was like you know better, right? And Islam is not a joke, right? And so misrepresenting yourself is something that could actually bring dishonor, right, to not only this community, but to the effort to establish Islam as a well-respected practice. So I think one of the other hallmarks of the Dar, particularly in Brooklyn, you see some, I think, pretty famous pictures of Shirley Chisholm, right, at a community festival that's sponsored by the Dar in Bed-Stuy, because there was an effort to be Muslim publicly in a way that was enticing, right, to people. People felt protected in that neighborhood. Part of sort of the Dar ethos is represented in the way that Masjid al-Taqwa became like a central hub for the cleanup, right, of Bed-Stuy as a neighborhood. So people know if you're in this sort of vicinity, like the brothers don't play, right? And you know that you will be seen, you will be cared for. You didn't have to be a Muslim, right? But I think, as in the example of the early communities, people started to say, there's something about this being Muslim, right? That means safety, it means protection, it means peace, it means beauty, right? People would see Muslim women walking down the street and be like, after they're like, why are they wearing so many clothes? They'd be like, but their women just seem so confident, right, and proud of themselves. So people were curious, right? And I think that ethos, again, in Brooklyn and Bed-Stuy in particular, is something that I think really attracted many more African Americans in particular to the movement. So certainly the incense and oils. I think this sort of infusion of martial arts, right, as a way. Certainly the Jawala Scouts and the Alima Scouts. And even thinking about what prison chaplaincy, right, as Muslims meant. It wasn't just sort of simply something that you saw coming out of the nation, but in New York State, right, originally, it was thinking about how do we provide resources and materials and alternatives, right, to sort of the nation ideology that people could start to even do some compare and contrast, right? What is sort of the theology? What is the purpose? What is the mission? And I think that's really important. Yes, that picture that you just pulled up, that's a Dar festival, like street festival.
By way of Sapello.com.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in awe, right? Like I said, as starting this conversation, I didn't know much about the Dar, and so I'm intrigued, right? But one of the things that stands out to me in this conversation that we're having is, and you said it a little early on, was that these groups of people, right? These Muslims were using these young people, right? Because that's the piece. Even when we look at the Nation of Islam, it was young men and women. But this strategy of using Al-Islam, right? Islam as the antidote to the social ills. And so that I see that common theme, and that's so like interesting to me, and then it sort of brings me present day to say, you know, what is that analysis that we all sort of sit back and think about as it relates to what we have as Muslims, what we know, and what we see around us. You mentioned earlier, you know, it wasn't just about protection for the Muslims.
Yes, that's right.
It was protection and security for what was in your vicinity.
Yes. And that has always been the way of Muslims, right? That part of what is, I think, one of the ultimate compliments that people have, whether or not they're Muslim, is that when I am in the company of Muslims, there is a way in which I am respected, that I am held with dignity, that I am valued, right? And this is not about proselytizing, right? I think the way we are becomes the message, right? We don't have to, browbeat people, right? We says there's no compulsion in religion, but I remember when my daughter was 12, right, she asked me that summer, she said, "Mommy, can this be the summer I decide whether or not I want to be a Muslim?" I wanted to faint on the inside.
Oh,
Right?
trust me. Listen, I have 3 daughters, so I know that time comes where, the questions start coming about
Yes.
where the key mark, or, all these different ideas. You're like, oh, come on, I ain't ready for this.
Right. So I remember having a conversation with my father, because I was like, how am I supposed to? This was like after, like, I kept my composure, and I was like, so, had to put on my psychologist voice. I was like, so tell me about why you want to ask this question. Like, what is it coming from? And she said, well, because sometimes you tell me to do things, but you don't explain why. And I was like, okay. Right. So she's like, I want to just discover for myself, like, what is the answer to the questions? Not that I'm trying to, like, say you're wrong, but I want to know. Right. And I remember my father telling me, he said, the answer to that is for you to be a good Muslim. Right. What are you modeling, right, for her that would make this religion something that continues to be inviting? Right. And I think that the community of Muslims, when we're living truly, right, not perfectly, but when we're living in a certain way, the deen becomes like a no-brainer, right, for people. And again, this is not utopia. The Dar was not utopic, and I'll speak to some of the themes that came out of my research. But this idea that this brings us closer to ourselves, this brings us closer to the Creator, and the self, which is in some ways an uprooting of those toxins of white supremacy, right? And I think perhaps one of the most profound miracles is that for people for whom are descendant of enslaved Africans, maybe 30% of whom were Muslim, the fact that we found our way back to Islam without any outside intervention, that's a miracle, right? That's a law, right? It wasn't anybody who said, hey, you guys, can I tell you about this Islam thing? We're like, no, there's something about this Islam. It feels, right, like it is a way for me to come back to myself. And so when we're living in that way, I think there is a truth that settles in, right? It's the truth of the deen, but also the truth of who we are, right, as African descendant people. And so I think this desire, right, to return to Allah, right, as the founders of the Dar said, really stems from, I think, this longing, which might be ancestral, is just something that's in our DNA, in our blood, which says there is a truth that I am seeking, and I'll know when I find it, right? It will answer those social ills. And so in the 1974 issue of the Dar magazine, it was called Jihad Akbar, right? So the Great Jihad. And that, I think that was one of the most significant aspects of the movement as well. From the very beginning, what they said was, we have to tell people who we are. We don't want them writing about us, speculating about us. We're going to issue a magazine, and y'all can pay like 75 cents for it, but it will include so much of our ideology, what we believe, what we know, right, what we're attempting to do. And this is what Imam Yahya Abdul Karim said in one issue. They knew that there was a natural affinity between Islam and the poor. They fully realized the ability of Islam to be an uplifting force for people, such as the poor and downtrodden of New York slums and ghettos. They sought to propagate the life-giving message of Islam in order to rouse the sleeping giant, which is this country's poor. Right? So this is them saying, we want to explain, right, what is the rationale for how we're engaging Islam. Like, I don't even want to say using Islam, right? But like how we're engaging with Islam as a path to liberation of so many things, right? Liberation of poverty, of white supremacy, of Arab hegemony, right? But that there's a way for us to return to Allah, to return to who we are. And in those early days, you have to also remember that these were, over the course of the movement, this is the Korean War, right? This is Vietnam. This is men coming back from the war addicted to opiates. unemployed, right? There's crime, there's still, right? All of these things that seem to repeat throughout history. And in 1965, when Malcolm X is assassinated, may Allah be pleased with him, there is sort of this, again, this upheaval that says, the way the newspaper is sort of spinning, right, Islam, especially in urban cities, is as a disruption, right? These Black Muslims, they're violent. It's like a religious gang, like they're trying to compete over territory. And all the while, it is still white supremacy and Christian hegemony, right, which is causing, right, really the root of the conflict. But people are reaching to Islam as the resolution. So yeah, there's more to say, but I want your questions.
Alhamdulillah, this is great. I think my question would be if you could talk a little bit more. I mean, your history project is the people's effect,
Yes.
people's effort on the people's effect to return back to Al-Islam. So you could talk a little bit more about your oral history project. What can we expect? You seem to have, I have to commend you, sister. You have your passion for this topic and your livable experience is remarkable to us. And to me, just hearing it, it's just a lot of I'm drawing a lot of parallels. Obviously, we'll be here all night drawing parallels with our experience coming, for me, especially for me, Mujahideen coming through, our parents coming through the Nation of Islam and the transition to Imam Muhammad. There's a lot of parallels. I'm just hearing it constantly with what you're saying. So, but if you could speak to particularly your project, what you're working on, how people can support it, just give us the spill.
Yeah. So if you can pull up, it's thepeopleseffort.com. And I began this work in 2022. I was awarded the Community Stories Fellowship through the Princeton's Crossroad Project, which is really looking to expand sort of the history of Black religion, right, in the United States. And often the study of Black religion, of course, centers Christianity. And so this project, as part of the initial cohort of fellows, and I wanted to focus on the Dar as a way to expand what we know of Black religion, especially during the sort of civil rights time, and also to demonstrate that when we use our own archival research, right, pictures and artifacts, when we think about stories that that our elders have, they're just waiting for an invitation. I think we take for granted, I think too often, the elders in our lives. And if we just started to ask questions like, tell me what it was like for you growing up in the 60s and the 70s, right? What was difficult? What was exciting, right? What was something that is still hard to talk about? For me, that is what I call a Black Muslim-centered, like appreciative inquiry, right? And in appreciative inquiry, we look at, what are we doing well, right? We can sit all day and say, here are the ills, the challenges, the social issues that we're still trying to navigate. But when we start with, well, what did we do well? It gets us to a different place. And part of the different place that I wanted us to be able to explore is women's voices in these movements. So again, one of the unique aspects of the Dar is that Brother Khalil Abdul-Kabir was sort of the Dar photographer, right? And so if you go to basically I tag, and I cite him in all of the pictures that I have included on the People's Effort website, because again, it is extraordinary that we have so many images that were captured at the time, right? So this is the picture that's on the front is of Master Mujahideen, right, in Philadelphia. And, when we think about, again, how did the men look, right? How were they standing out? How were people drawn to the movement, it was to these images, right? The nation certainly, and today still very much iconic, is the brothers in the suits and the bow ties, right? I've done research with Black Christians that is their image, right? Their mental image of who a Muslim is, right? But then when we dig deeper, there's also these Muslims, these Sunni Orthodox Muslims. But what stood out to me was in many of the pictures, it starts to tell a story of a movement that you would imagine is mostly men, right? Again, men who look, again, very compelling, right? Handsome men, right? This strange garb that they're wearing. But my question is, where were the women, right? How did they experience this movement towards orthodoxy, right? Towards what some people would consider very conservative, right? Very traditional sort of gender roles. And my question was, if the voices and the lived experiences of women are absent, right, from just the few written accounts that we have, the assumption can be the women had no voice, right? It means that we have to begin to ask different questions. And in one of the brief histories of the Dar, and it's titled Dar Islam Principle Practice Movement, Dr. Kamal Hassan, he says, Muslim women who through their sacrifice, sound judgment, and piety, as well as their unmitigated inner strength and fortitude, accounted for much of the programmatic success of the Dar Islam movement. Their work was emblematic of the adage that no society flourishes unless its women are valued and honored. You hear echoes of Clara Muhammad there, right? This is Black women. This is just what we do. And so for me, it was, if this is what is being stated about the influence of the women, we need to also understand the movement from their eyes. And so I wanted to interview women. And what I found is, for many, and for men and women, but for women in particular, that time was complicated, right? I mean, there was so much to be proud about, so much compromise, right, around, and this was true of all Black women and all these sort of Muslim movements. What are we getting in return, right, for us being able to embrace something that feels more traditional, right? In Jihad al-Akbar, the Dar magazine, it talks about sort of like the woes of feminism, right? This feminism is trying to like destroy our women, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not as simple, right? As women sort of just giving up and giving in, they're making very strategic choices. And I think what I found in the interviews that I did with women who are connected to the movement is that there are choices being made, right? And still, again, some of the themes that you see echoed today is that there were class differences, there were educational differences. Some of the women were more educated than the men. Some of the men were returning citizens, right? They were coming out of periods of incarceration, out of war. So it really was the women who were holding it down, right? And so this was a movement that also practiced polygamy. And so what did it mean for perhaps a woman who had been raised in a middle-class household, who was educated, right, who was earning, right, a wage, to then in some ways submit to a more traditional sort of home life, which included, right, having a co-wife, included a blended sort of family or unit. These were struggles, and again, not a perfect movement. And so what I heard sort of underlying some of these testimonies was the feeling that there's still much unresolved, right? So the movement officially dissolved in 1982, right? So a period of 2 decades. And part of the dissolution of the movement was one of the main factors. Still, there's a lot of, I think, different sort of hypotheses about this. but that a man a Pakistani Muslim man by the name of Sheikh Jilani started to influence some of the leadership of the Dar. Some former members say this was done to disrupt sort of African American leadership, right? That it exploited, again, I think some aspect within us, right? That Frantz Fanon calls, the imperial rot, right? The germs of rot that cause us to question our own legitimacy, or thinking that some other Muslim, a non-Black Muslim, has a more authentic, right, sort of credible, legitimate form of Islam to teach us. Because initially the Dar was very adamant, right? You can support us, right? And you're hearing echoes. You can support us, but we will lead ourselves, right? And so in 1978, this Pakistani sort of Sufi religious figure, Sheikh Jilani, begins to meet with high-ranking members of the leadership. And by 1982, Imam Yahya Abdul Karim sort of abdicates his leadership to Sheikh Jilani, right? And that becomes a breaking point, like a fracturing that still reverberates. Some of those who decided not to follow Sheikh Jilani, sort of the reconfiguration of the Dar happens under the leadership of Imam Jamil El-Amin. And some of those who followed Sheikh Jilani formed the community, which is now known as Islamburg, New York. But those, you have to think of it in terms of, these were families, right, that were splitting and fracturing. And so that resulted in what I heard was like unresolved trauma, right? Almost this anger, this confusion, like we were doing well. Like what happened, right? How did this dissolve? How did sort of what some would say this infiltration of our leadership happen? And I think, again, my stepdad, my Abu, is 74. And, I think his answer, right, sort of from a spiritual perspective, is that everything has an end, right? And only Allah knows sort of the full, complete story. But it's one that's so very painful. And so as we document the movement, what we also find is the reconfiguration under Al-Ummah, and then even sort of a later fracturing of Al-Ummah later, right, to this present day. And so whatever sort of hypothesis or theory folks have about the why, the result, sort of the psychosocial spiritual impact, is that people are still seeking, right? Seeking to belong to a community in which they feel protected. There's some self-determination. And these interviews, what I sought to do in the interviews is to lift up the voices of the women, the perspectives, but also to try to substantiate, I think, some of the anecdotes about the Dar, right? So brother Dr. Mukhtar Curtis, may Allah be pleased with him, he just passed away on February 17th. 30 years ago, he wrote one of the first chapters, right, called Urban Muslims, Formation of the Dar al-Islam Movement. He wrote that 30 years ago, right? And so all of the references to the movement kind of are circular. So I asked the question, if there were in fact 40 masajid that were a part of this community, where were they, right? Who led them? How many people, right, were a part of those movements? Where did they where were their allegiances? Because this was a movement that required that people pledge bayat, right, or pledge allegiance to a leader. And so I wanted to be able to substantiate some of the anecdotes about the movement through qualitative interviews and through archive fact-finding, and have that presented as a way for people to start to understand the Dar.
This is like I'm so in awe, and I love that you're doing this project. I know that oral history it has been getting such attention in current times, and it's so important to tell these stories. As you were talking, the only thing that amongst some other things, but what stood out for me was just like, these are Black people, right? These are Black people
Yes.
from the hood.
Yes.
And so, and I'm just making that connection in my mind, because it just, we're not a monolith, right?
Nope. Absolutely
And
not.
we say those things, but when you get this story of the Dar, it comes to life in a way that's so real. Like, we're not a monolith. There were so many experiences amongst Black people, amongst Black Muslims, right?
Yes.
Imam Bilal was talking about the fact that there are some parallels between the experience of the nation and the stories that you're sharing with us now of the Dar. And, some of these things, at least for me, I had no idea of it. I'm sure, a lot of people who look at Black Muslims, right, sort of just group us all up into this one bunch, and they have whatever that impression is that they have, and then you get these different types of stories of how we came to Islam, and I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful.
And one of the last things that I want to share is that when people do ask me about, so like, how did your parents come to Islam, right? Or they assume that I'm a convert, that I don't have Muslim parents. One, it's like, I tolerate no slander of my NOI cousins, right? People say, well, it wasn't, I'm not that kind of Muslim, right? We can talk about, yes, we have sort of the way that theology and ideology evolves over time, which I think is also part of the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's like we have to understand, I think, what the intent even of early movements, like the Moorish Science Temple, right? Noble Drew Ali, Elijah Muhammad. I said, but you cannot deny, right, the historical significance of a people saying, I will name myself. I will dress in the way that I think represents my connection to the Creator, and even my own divinity, right? And that, I am not going to look to a white Jesus to pray to. And one of the, I think what kind of got the fire going under me even more so was I became a Crossroads Fellow in January of 2022. And at the end of that year, I come across this social media account of a South Asian artist who created a painting. She said, she was commissioned to do this painting. And as soon as I see the painting, I recognize it as from a photograph of Masjid Mujahideen in Philadelphia. And her caption was, that she said, this oil painting depicts Muslim worshipers entering a storefront mosque in South Side of Chicago in the 90s, reflecting a sense of the racially diverse and spirited religious atmosphere at the time. False. Absolutely false. This is not the 1990s. This is not the South Side of Chicago, right? This is the 70s. This is West Philadelphia. And the painting, with some minor changes, is almost the exact replica of the photo. So I was like, well, maybe she don't know. So I'm a correct, right? And there was only one other, this person has, many thousands of followers on Instagram and Twitter. One person commented, that's not Chicago. I was like, well, no, maybe we need to make it plain. I know exactly where it is. You need to cite the photographer. You need to, one, cite what is the inspiration for this photo. And I said, this was, I gave all of the exact citations. And the reason why this is important, right, is that our history is not something that should be played with, right? These are significant, substantial movements. And, we can't sort of just chalk this up to ignorance, right? I didn't know. No, that is plagiarism in my view, right? And so I tweeted at the artist. I put a caption underneath the Instagram post, no response. So now I'm going to light you up, right? Because you have an opportunity to respond. Like, this is my history, right? So how dare you, right? Sort of change it and alter it in a way, at least cite the source, right? As so many things that stem from Black culture, from Black Muslim culture, we don't mind, right? We're very generous to a fault, right? We'll say, like, just say, alhamdulillah, I got this from brother so and so, right? Like, that person, that sister was the muse for this. We're very generous. But when there is, at least to me, appeared to be a concerted effort, at least to not acknowledge the history, I was mad at the artist, but I was also mad at myself, right? Have I done enough to explain what this picture represents, right? So I was like, Kameelah, right? Like, we can correct, but we also have to offer a solution, right? For what it might mean for someone coming along, right? And just scrolling that person's page and saying, oh, wow, what an amazing painting. No, there needs to be more effort on our part, right? To say, here is the accurate history. So if you don't cite or know the accurate history when it is available, then that means it is intentional, right? That now it means that you are willfully ignorant, right? Not like, oh, I didn't know, there wasn't any references, I couldn't find, right, any information. It is now available, right? The website is still a work in progress. What I'm attempting to do, even through a timeline, is to show how much is happening, like how dynamic the time is. So when you talk about Shirley Chisholm, right, coming and speaking to the Muslims at a street festival in Bed-Stuy, it means something, right? This is the woman who is eventually running for president, right? Who is at a street festival with Black Muslims, right? Who are very proud of who they are and what they're doing, right? And the impact on the community. And someone who eventually becomes a presidential candidate is photographed there. This is what I believe is American history, but certainly the history that all American Muslims should know, all Black Muslims should know, and to appreciate, right? I appreciate the Nation of Islam, the WD Muhammad community, right? Like, I feel like this is, right, if we're talking genealogy, these are my cousins, right? And so I want to know who my family is. And so I think when we know who we are, we're able to share that with other generations. So they have a sense of, I tell my son who's 18, he's now in college. I think he's maybe having a little too much fun. And I tell him, remember who you are, right? Like, just know that when you can cite your lineage in this way, you are not only representing yourself, right? You're representing the people who have sacrificed for you, who have built for you, and in some ways are impatient for you to now pick up, right, the baton and to lead it to another phase of development. So don't be wilding out there, right? Like, you're part of something that is, some would say miraculous, right? This return to Islam, this return to Allah. And so, and when you know that history, you're also going to be held accountable for it, right? And so be wise, right, in how you conduct yourself. And I think that's the Dar in me. I'm like, don't be out there, embarrassing your people.
And before you go, and before you jump in, Imam Bilal, I just want to say I love that you sort of, culminated in that last set of statements, because we're in Black History Month, African American History Month, New Freedom February, right?
Yes.
And so that's the significance of this all.
Absolutely.
This time where we're telling these stories, recounting these experiences, is to say that you're connected to something that perhaps you don't always understand the significance of it, but when we're telling these stories, when we're talking about these achievements, it means something, not just for who they were then, but for who you are now.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
I mean, beautifully well put. Couldn't say any better. That speaking of cousins, we want to recognize some of our cousins. Sister Mukhtara, wa alaikum assalam, one of our co-founders of the Bambar group, who got us all of our cousins together in one place and one spot on Facebook, Bambar.
Not an easy thing to do.
Not an easy thing to do, but it has to be done.
Yes.
And she talks about, again, referencing the young people that started the Dar.
Yes.
And also talks about that how the pioneers had to create spaces where the youth, the 20-year-olds of today, don't have to necessarily create any new spaces. And she also tagged our dear beloved Sister Miriam Sullivan. She often says the Dar was the Salafi 1.0 before the Ultra.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Salafi before that was even a thing.
Yes. Recognize our dear brother Jerome Ahmed. Wa alaikum assalam. He said, very clear message, Dr. Kameelah. Imam Muhammad told us those very same words. He told you to carry on, sister, with your work. My dear beloved brother Khalil Abdul Malik, who was a dear beloved friend of my dear late father, who also his introduction to Islam was through the Dar before he joined Imam Muhammad's community.
Okay.
And he also cited that brother Abdul Salam was also a photographer for the Dar. And me and him have had very much discussions about the Dar history as well. We want to give a shout out to Brother Anthony Morel. He says, Assalamu alaikum. And he says, you're not about to change our history. He says, definitely plagiarism. So,
not on my watch.
Not on our watch. So, sister, we can't thank you very much, for your time. You see, we were supposed to go 30 minutes. We go an hour here.
See, you get this
okay. It was hard to stop. It was hard to stop because it was so much intrigue.
Oh,
it is so much intrigue, and it was so much intrigue, and it's a movie. It's a movie, sister. It's a documentary.
I think so, and I definitely want to, just shout out the Dar Islam collection, Sister Kameelah Barbour and her father Khalil Abdul Kabir, who had this just amazing treasure of photographs from the Dar. Dr. Amina Al-Din is a mentor of mine. I just love this sister. I sent her the link to the website, and I was like on pins and needles. I was like, I hope she approves. I mean, this is somebody who literally wrote African American Islam. She's got to approve, right? She's got to give me the stamp. And certainly, my stepfather, my Abu Al-Had Ali Muhammad, who has been for many, many years telling me stories about his time and just how formative it was, right, for him. And I'm getting him, right, to write down his memoirs because this is just what we have to preserve, right? I think it's an obligation for us to preserve these stories of our lineage. So when I see documentaries about, Sister Clara Muhammad, I'm like, this is necessary work that we have to support. No one is going to do it for us, right? Or they're going to do it and package it in a way that is less potent, that is less true. And so if we are invested in ourselves, then we have to be as invested in our history. So I would say document. I tell people now, you don't have to wait in order to start any kind of oral history. Ask your parents, right? What brought you to Islam, right? What intrigued you about it? What was challenging? I mean, they're in their 20s and they say, oh, I'm a Muslim now. And their parents were like, you were what? Right? But what did it mean for you to choose, right? And I tell, to myself first and then to others, even those of us who are born into Muslim families, we have to choose Islam, right? At some point, we have to make a conscious choice, right? We can't rely on sort of what was given to us, I think, so bravely. We have to choose, and then we have to make sure that is reflected in our actions. And part of that choosing is the preservation of our past, right? This is something I hope, inshallah, God willing, my great-grandchildren, right, is able to say, my second great-grandfather was a member of the Dar, right? And this is how he encountered Islam in Harlem, right, in 1970s. And so for me, this is something that is urgent, right? We're losing so many elders, right? Every time I see a janazah post on Facebook, I'm just like, that is a library, right, of information that we've lost. So call up some folks that you know, aunties in the community, uncles, right? The brother that's always at Juma, right? Always in the same spot. Ask him how we got there, right? And especially for those who, you know, may not have had a formal leadership title, they're just always present, right? They have so much. They've lived through so much. They've observed so much that they can share with us, and we need to capture that as much as possible. So that would be my parting words. Definitely, I want to expand the peopleseffort.com to have it be a living, you know, archive of information about the Dar Islam movement. And, you know, would hope that folks who do have stories, have artifacts, pictures, right? I mean, you're seeing young girls in the 80s wearing khimars, right? Jump a double dutch.
Hold on,
right?
we got you. Watch this. That's sister.
Oh, that's me. So yeah, so I mean, I think that we don't always fully understand how much treasure we possess, right? And I think all of it is treasure. We don't have to go someplace else to discover it. It is in our families, right? It is in the communities that we're a part of, even when we have complicated relationships to those communities, right? Some of us have left to go to college. We come back, we're like, right? But I think, again, it is not perfection or utopia that we should be seeking, right? But a way for us to think about what kind of impact am I trying to leave, right? What seeds am I trying to plant for another generation, right? That there will be, you know, possibly descendants who will sit under the shades of trees that we are really just starting to cultivate. So I think everyone can contribute to either this effort specifically about the Dar or the history of their local community. Capture it. I mean, it is just so fleeting, right? And we lose people who are really influential every single day. So don't wait. Have a conversation with somebody, document it. We have now phones. All of our pictures are captured on there. So the days of those albums, those brown albums with the, like, we don't have those anymore. But we have to sort of create a special place where we archive like the living history and also the history of the past. Inshallah.
Inshallah. What a way to end New Freedom February. We started off with Sister Aisha K. Mustafa, the long-standing managing editor of the Journal.
Yes.
And we've been blessed today with our dear sister Kameelah. And we have a few more special episodes coming up, but that's the final of our regular scheduled programming for this month. So we thank you all who've joined us. And our theme this whole month was carrying our history forward. And so your words today were very key to that. So we appreciate you sharing that. We have a lot of events coming up in the next couple of days, couple of weeks. So look out on our platform for the flyers and the advertisements. And we have a special show tomorrow, also Interfaith, our monthly Muslim / folklore around the word of life. So tune into that at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Any other last words before we leave?
Check out thepeopleseffort.com.
Bam.
Yeah, that right there.
That's all you do. All right, guys. Until next time. Peace.
All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu
Salam.
Legacy, brothers and sisters, let's celebrate. Legacy, Muslim Journal, 60 years today. Legacy, our history, our perspective, our way. Legacy, Islam is our path, success away. Legacy, visit muslimjournal.net online. Legacy, text sponsor the 999. Legacy, 999. Legacy, muslimjournal.net online. Legacy, brothers and sisters, let's celebrate. Legacy, Muslim Journal, 60 years today. Legacy, our history, our perspective, our way. Legacy, Islam is our path, success away. Legacy, visit muslimjournal.net online. Legacy, text sponsor the 999. Legacy, 999. Legacy, muslimjournal.net online.
Sending love in every shade of brown.
first cutter be the one that sets the tone, to add pressure to a lesser known flesh and bone, to look different than the picture shown, and to be a rebel means you're not about to settle till you get your own. This one's for all my outside of the box thinkers, with bumblebee stingers and paper cut fingers and scrapes on their kneecaps. I know the pain lingers. The healthy way to heal a broken wing is to give it love. Sending love in every shade of brown to you. Sending love in every shade of brown to you. Sending love in every shade of brown to you. Sending love in every shade of brown, shade of brown. Yeah, the thing about community is how proud it is. We understand what well balanced and what grounded is. And love is the hinge that heals and mends, conceals and blends, and keeps us all covered. That's grounded shit. We say it's all black when it's all love, and it's brown when it's all good. Groundages, we help heal the hurt. So put us on. I said you gotta put us on.